Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here with my review for the Netflix Resident Evil series. I'm going to try to keep this short because I know I'm going to talk about it on the stream at some point. This is also technically a 420 review. I didn't like it. Like, I know I'm like already 2 weeks behind. This was really for like the prosperity sort of deal where it's like, I just want to have an actual video out where I at least somewhat talk about it, because this could honestly be an hour or so long. And I'm like, I can just, whatever the next stream is will probably be a lot of video game talk because there's been a lot of news lately. Also, I got a PlayStation 5, which is still in the box since Friday, hitting the table and everything, but I'm hyped. So I'm gonna be doing that after because I don't want to spend forever talking about this. I love Resident Evil. It's my favorite franchise. Has been ever since I was a little kid. It was Resident Evil. You know, this is where I think Wesker was my favorite, where it was Code Veronica X specifically. You guys can barely tell what that is. And then this is Resident Evil 5, where Wesker died. And then this is Resident Evil Netflix, where Wesker is alive. Obviously, I'm just gonna do full spoilers for this one. Wesker's alive. He has 2 kids, but it's also canon because they do stuff where it's like, okay, so this is technically everything that's happened in the games, up to I guess 5. I mean, maybe 6 even. Well, considering this takes place in 2020, yes, it would be 6, and I believe 7 as well. But that that doesn't tie in nearly as harshly. But at this point, all the games are canon. Resident Evil 0 all the way up to possibly Resident Evil 7, but at the very least Resident Evil 6. And it's like, this, what's the point in that? Like, they reference that and it's like, I don't understand why. The fact that he built the puzzle inside the house, I guess, is a bit of a reference to the whole Spencer Mansion thing and being in places where there are puzzles and whatnot. And it was like Moonlight Sonata, I guess he knew that was the trick to open up that door. Like, that's the only way that like, it was the connection, because it was like Moonlight Sonata, it's like the song of Resident Evil. But it's just interesting, and not in a fun way. I did not like Jade. She was such a piece of shit. Like, it was ridiculous how much that, like, teen drama, of course, it's the teen drama thing, and it's like, okay, sure. And it was just so over the top that I hated her. And I was like, when it first started, I didn't realize that she was technically supposed to be, the main character. I mean, even with the way they do the back and forth, I still don't feel like, despite the fact that she's, at least up until the end where we realize that Billy's alive as well, but even with it just being like her storyline in the future, she still didn't feel like the main character. I never felt, maybe it's because I felt like she didn't do enough that was entertaining to me to like really make her stand out as like the main character, because even though it was just her in the future for the most part, I still was never like, oh man, the main character, Jade Wesker. It was just like, yeah, it's Jade, it's her in the future, and that's about it. It was whatever. Like, the past was way more entertaining than the future storyline, and that's very unfortunate. And I knew that from the very beginning, because I was just like, I actually don't care about the post-apocalyptic part. Like, honestly, the pre-apocalypse is really where the Resident Evil stuff is, because that's kind of the point of Resident Evil, is like, what's the chaos that's happening now that could potentially lead up to like a post-apocalyptic world, or everyone under mind control and stuff like that. That's kind of what Resident Evil's for. Is like, how do they keep stopping all the disasters? Once the disaster happens, it's kind of like, all right, well, I mean, you got like a small window, but I also don't care about the stuff in the future. Everything's a disaster. I don't really care if they make up stuff, which I swear I thought they were gonna straight up pull a Dead Rising, because I'm like, they're like, the zombies are advancing, and I was like, if she has a bee in this pop on her neck, I wouldn't, honestly, it would have made me laugh, and I would have been like, sure. It's just, they officially were like, Resident Evil is going into Dead Rising, that's how we get our crossover. But they didn't do that. But at one point I was just like, there's no way they're gonna have this junk pop open and like a bee is gonna come out, right? But I honestly thought they could. I thought they could pull a Dead Rising, and I'm glad they didn't. I guess it would have been even crazier, but maybe that would have been better if that was the thing, and then it was like they're going Dead Rising plus Resident Evil, and then both have completely gone to hell and become an apocalypse. Maybe that could have been silly, at least. But this was just like, okay, I kind of hate Jade. I hate that random girl. Oh my goodness, this is another thing. There's one of those random moments where I just think about something and I'm like, that didn't go how I wanted it to. It didn't go how I expected. And it just feels weird now. And that's Billy getting beat up at lunch, because they did the classic thing in the first half, classic. Girl walks past the table. The other girls seem like the popular girls, like, yo, the popular bitch is at the table. And then it's like, oh, we don't want you to sit with us. And so it's like, oh, that's kind of sad. One nerd is about to meet the other nerd, and then they become friends. And that's Billy's new friend in town. And then Instead of that being the case, it was like, oh, no, I side with the girls who didn't want you sitting next to them. You're an actual crazy person who was just like, oh, you're vegan? We would just be popping caps in Bambi. And I'm like, what is her problem? She's weird and crazy, and she has some major freaking issues. And it was just so over the top, and it doesn't go anywhere really. Like, I mean, I guess they were kind of teasing it would, because they were okay when she did like the skateboard thing later, but at the same time, it wasn't that big of a deal. I think it was more for Wesker's scene than it was actually Billy's character. It was just kind of like the next step for her having issues where it's like, oh, people think I'm crazy or people think I'm weak and stuff like that. But I was just like, okay. And then she was a real piece of shit about it when she just went and was like, obviously it wasn't Billy's fault, but she's like, yo, I apologize and this and that. And she just puts a burrito in her face. And I'm like, this is utterly insane. And then of course, Jade was pissed off. She hits her in the head with, I don't know, like a shoe or something. And so, and this is something I didn't even like truly realize until I watched a different review, because it's been like 2 weeks and I kind of forgot about it. But why did Jade put the helmet in her locker? Like, once that happens, it's kind of like, well, that's weird, because when it first happened, I assumed someone else was setting her up, because I'm like, well, of course it wouldn't actually be Jade, because that would be ridiculous. And I remember thinking that when I watched it, because I'm like, well, I was curious. That's what made me think like it couldn't be Jade. There's like a new mystery, like somebody else is effing with her now because they put on a raccoon head. And it's like, why would you put it in your sister's locker if you were beating up the girl for making fun of your sister, but you're gonna get your sister expelled? And that was ridiculously stupid. And it's like, why wouldn't you just put it back where you got it from? Because it brings up the whole question of why you would stuff it not in your own locker, specifically your sister's locker. You didn't like put it in your locker, you put it in her locker. It's like, that just doesn't make any sense. But it led to like one of genuinely 2 good scenes that I consider like 10 out of 10 moments in this whole series. And that one was, the first one was the Wesker scene. It was very simple. He was menacing and mean, and it was kind of super corrupt of him to be like, I'm very important, but I don't think you are. Like, he degraded this man so much that he had to tell his daughter, like, yo, shut up, like, kids and whatever. But at the same time, he didn't even need to do all the crazy stuff, because it's like, because he mentions it at the very end where it's like, no, your daughter attacked my daughter twice. And I'm like, that should have been the first thing. He doesn't even have to go evil. He could have just walked in and been like, yeah, she attacked my daughter twice. One is literally like all over the internet. My daughter came home crying and stuff. And then, however he heard about the second one, it was like, and then today she tried to apologize for something that wasn't her fault, and your daughter shoved a burrito in her face. It probably don't matter that much. And then he could go into the Wesker thing, because they probably would need to, based on the logic of the first girl not getting in trouble, but the second girl getting in trouble. But it is the classic escalation. It's like, kid stuff. And then somebody gets super pissed off and hits somebody in the head. It's like, well, maybe it's not just kid stuff anymore. So that balancing act, I guess. But it was interesting, and I love that scene. And just to get out of the way, the only other scene that I was like 10 out of 10 was the spider scene where it stabbed the guy and like split him upward. I was like, okay, that was gross. A bunch of blood came out, which was a lot better than, I think, episode 2, where Jade was trying to save the dude on the truck and he was getting bit. And I swear it just looked like little 2D sprites. Maybe it was references to like Resident Evil 1, because it looked like some 2D sprites were just going like out of this dude's neck. And I'm like, that's fascinating. So that was interesting. But yeah, Wesker 10 out of 10, and then the spider killing that guy 10 out of 10. All the other monsters are meh. The dogs don't do much. The lickers don't really do anything logical, because everybody's getting killed off and it's just left and right, they're just like being killed. But it's people who are like stealthing the whole way, and they're the ones getting picked off from like a distance. It's not like it's right up on them. It's like from a distance, and people are just getting hit with their tongues, and then they're just getting like pulled off on strings. And it was like, yeah, I guess everybody's flipping out, but everyone that's following Jade is basically being super stealthy, and there's guns flying all over the place. So it's not like there aren't a million sounds where all the lickers would be like, let's go in this direction. They're just picking off people from a distance, like the only people being super stealthy. And of course, plot armor is coming in left and right, where every time Jade is like just past something or just before something, a licker jumps on somebody or stabs them through the back or in the stomach. And then of course she has her face-to-face moment where nothing happens and she slams the door in its face and she's fine. And then epic spider sequence, flashback, flash forward. Jay was stupid and she did the classic, I'm gonna bring a zombie on board thing, got her best friend killed and the baby killed. I was like, oh, that's nuts. That's nuts. Flashback stuff was actually somewhat entertaining. You have the mystery of this person who starts to figure out stuff about actual Raccoon City. We go through, we get the official answer as to how we have Wesker in the flashback or in, you know, the future in general, when we know in canon he died right here, Resident Evil 5, fell into a volcano and was hit with a missile. Like, it was game over. But we have Wesker, and so then we get the flashback. Turns out they're clones, and the original Wesker came in looking like Blade, which was ridiculous. Like, I don't understand why they did that at all. Like, you cannot have that hairstyle. It's not like it was just he had hair and he was dressed in all black, and so if he's black he looks like Blade. It was like, no, you gave him that really dumb haircut that specifically makes him look like Blade, and they somehow didn't see that. And it's like, okay. So Blade walks in, and he was actually a lot like Wesker, which I was like, okay, for like the 5 minutes of him as actual Wesker, was like, oh, that's pretty entertaining. He hates his own clones, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that. That's Wesker for sure. I'm gonna make me, because I'm amazing, I'm gonna make me again, but I'm gonna treat them like they're worthless, because he would have the classic thing where it's like, my clones are not gonna be better than me. I'm still the prime, and then I'll figure some stuff out to make you guys better later on. So I was like, okay, he kind of hates them. He got busted, boom, killing, destroying the evidence. I was like, that's fantastic. So he has his 3 clones. We have our Wesker, we have Albert, and then we have Bert. Bert, who is hilarious and wants those damn breadsticks. Did love Bert. Bert was actually probably another 10 out of 10. Just for the comedy of it, it was like, this is actually really entertaining, and he's very funny. And that breadsticks was like, oh, okay, fine. And he's like a man throwing breadsticks at a woman and just being like, fine, my basket is done, bring me more breadsticks. It was just like, that's funny. That's a funny one. So I like Bert, and he was also very like psychotic. Like, even Wesker mentions it, where it's like, you can't trust Bert, like he's insane. And then right after that, it's like he killed off the guards and he managed to get out and he's shaven, and it's like, oh, Bert is like the super dark one, where it's like extremes. It's just super funny, super light, and then when he's mad, he's like Wesker man. I was like, because he was about to do something else before he threw those breadsticks, and it was like, okay. And he even had the conversation like, sometimes you just have that anger in you. It's like, that's Wesker. So Bert was funny. Spider was 10 out of 10. The first Wesker moment where he threatened the guy, 10 out of 10. And then the rest of the series was the rest of the series. They have some stuff where Jade's daughter is not necessarily immune, but like zombies won't attack her. And I feel like that was a connection to Jade in the beginning, where the worm like screams in her face, but it doesn't actually end up killing her. I think maybe that was supposed to be connected. I don't think it matters, because there's no effing way that this gets to season 2. Like there's just no way. I would much rather see Cowboy Bebop season 2 over this in the season 2. I mean, maybe it could get better, and I just don't know. But I'm like, if I had to pick one, I personally would be like, just give me Cowboy Bebop. And that ending was really bad too. But I like the fact that they did live action anime, and it actually felt like live action anime. This felt like just a waste of time. It didn't feel like Resident Evil. They had Wesker, they had the references, Moonlight Sonata. The one dude who's coming after Jade says like, call me the master of unlocking. He has a cool scene during that when they're doing their whole escape sequence, and he has like the cool shoot 'em up gun moment. It was like, okay, that's cool. And then he dies. And he was also really weird. It was just like, he would always say cool. I did like the intro where it was like, he's the menacing bad guy, but he like slipped, and I was like, that was funny. But that was also where I'm like, okay, that's a sign this ain't Resident Evil right there, because it's not that funny, or like overtly funny to make that sort of joke. But I wasn't expecting much of anything. I didn't expect anything from this show. Actually, there was one thing that unfortunately I made this mistake, and that was 100% on me. For some reason, I gave myself the idea that this was a limited series and not them doing like season 1. And I don't know why I thought that, but it made me even angrier at the end, where I was like, they thought this was going to be like the thing. Like, they wrote it and somehow didn't write Resident Evil, but they were like, it's Resident Evil. And they, because they do stuff throughout the season where I was like, okay, because in my head I'm thinking this is one season. So unfortunate. And I was like, okay, they reference stuff in the future timeline where it's like, this person died and these things happen. Because I think at the end, when Billy's yelling at Jade, she references like 3 or 4 different people that we've never even heard of in the show, unless I just forgot everyone's names, which there aren't really that many characters, so I don't think I forgot them, especially like female characters. So I was like, I don't think like the names that I heard were characters where I was just like, I just didn't remember that. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure these are people that are supposed to show up later on, where it's like, she rattles off names, and then it's like, oh, okay, this is how they're doing it. So they're referencing things that have happened to them, but we would have to wait to see, throughout the seasons as it builds up. And that's unfortunate, because in all honesty, no joke, it still would not be great. But if they did none of the future stuff and it was 100% just do Resident Evil, even if it's leading up to an apocalypse, I mean, I wouldn't want it to, but don't tell us, I guess. But even if that's where it's leading, not that we would consider it canon anyway, it doesn't matter if the games are canon to the show, it's not canon to the games, like who cares? So if they had just done all the stuff that was said in the past, not that I enjoyed it the most, well, I did enjoy the most out of everything we got, but not that it's the greatest, dealing with Jade and her issues and just being like an a-hole. Just in the first episode, I was just like, wow, I hate this character. And it was so excessive how angry she was. Like, she literally, like, he's on a business call and he had one, and I swear, it's maybe, it might be a culture-based thing, but I was like, man, Black Dad Wesker is a dangerous combination. And he had one moment when they were in this lab where he was super pissed at Jay and he was just like, you're gonna do what the fuck I tell you. And I was like, oh, that's Black Dad Wesker. But then he got hit in the back of the head and everything was cool. But I was like, they keep effing around, and I'm just saying, be careful. But she's like flipping this stuff where he's like, where were you? He's like, I'm in a business meeting, fuck you. And it's just like, man, that just doesn't stand. But that was interesting. It was a thing. I'm sure I'm going to talk about this more because there are a million more things to not like about this show. And unfortunately, they won a season 2, which I just don't see it happening. I do not see it happening because I don't think they'll spend the money. But I don't know. It's still technically on like number 3 or 4, I think, as far as like the top 10. So it's still technically up there. And I've heard people say that they actually enjoyed it when they don't know Resident Evil. I personally feel like even outside of Resident Evil, this still isn't that entertaining. And I would definitely try to go into it. It was hard not to, but I tried my best to not be super biased. Because from episode 1, I was just like, even before I started, I was like, try not to be super biased. Is Resident Evil. You don't even expect it to be good, but try not to be biased. And I feel like there's definitely some potential in here. Like it's all in the past though. That's the unfortunate thing. I think all the potential and all the good stuff is literally in the past. Even knowing that it's going to lead to the apocalypse and stuff, I'm like, I would love to see exactly how it happened. Like I said in my head, I was thinking this was a limited event sort of deal. So they were going to show everything and all the answers were going to happen. It was like, it's going to spread from Raccoon City and that's the end. And it was chaos. And then, things kind of move on and it would wrap up both storylines. Sorely mistaken. Didn't know they were trying to make a show about it, but hey, so if it was just in the past, I could see it. That's definitely where the most entertaining stuff is. Them going through the apartment and it's actually them solving puzzles and all the silly stuff. It was like, it's ridiculous, but also entertaining. It felt like Resident Evil. They literally did the Moonlight Sonata. And also, I believe this is technically the most we've ever heard of Moonlight Sonata in any of the live action Resident Evil stuff, because any other time they, like in Welcome to Raccoon City, I think they did the actual amount of keys from the original game. And I'm sure it's somewhere in the old series of movies, and I'm sure it's in some of the CG movies as well, but I'm pretty sure this is at least live action. I can't even remember as far as the CG movie, so it might be the longest we've heard it in any of the films whatsoever, but for sure in live action, I think this is actually the longest they ever played Moonlight Sonata. So I was like, if there is a thing to be like, you have this achievement, it's the longest rendition of Moonlight Sonata in a live action Resident Evil series, as far as I'm aware. But that's about it. That was some entertaining stuff. The monsters look fine, at least, but I wasn't like blown away by them. I like the concept of them having, the giant alligator. That was cool. I don't know what Billy's deal was as far as like shooting up her own troops and stuff when she had like the things swirling around her. I was like, this doesn't make much sense. And that leads me, this is where I'll end it, because this is where I should have started. I don't even like the zombies in this. Not the fact that they're fast, which is not Resident Evil zombies, because if they're fast, they're not zombies. They are actual different things, because that's Resident Evil is like, okay, we want fast enemies. Well, they aren't zombies. Then they're Las Plagas, or they're the other thing from 5 and 6 that I Los Ganados. There it is. So it's like more intelligence. It's this thing. Zombies is that thing. It's just a different letter, but it's that thing over there. And then it's like they have their separation, and it was like, it's zombies. They're all fast, and that's about it. They're slow when they're cold, which I was like, okay, I always like that whenever shows put that in there, which no one ever does. I think that's in like maybe a season of The Walking Dead. I know it's in the comic they reference it, where it's like, it's cold, so it's easier to survive. But most zombie shows don't actually talk about that. And I was like, oh, that's cool. The scientific part of that, for that quick moment, was kind of entertaining. I was like, that's pretty neat. Also, there has to have been something, aside from the zombie thing, with her daughter, because Wesker referenced Jade, and I think he was talking about Jade, but it may have been Billy, where they were able to do things at like 4 years old and speak like fluent languages and stuff. And then when they showed Jade's daughter, and I was like, okay, she's playing the thing, and then she's just like going crazy, they made it seem like she was like studying for like a little bit, like maybe a month, and she was like that insane, which you could technically do in a month, but I wouldn't think she would be practicing like 100% of the time. You could do it in a month technically, but I'm like, you'd have to be like all in on the piano. And that seemed interesting. And I was like, I feel like that's supposed to be a reference to Jade. Sorry, the music cut off. I just realized that it did that. That's probably went off for a minute. I should put that on loop. Things you learn. But yeah, I didn't even like the zombies. They ran. But the main thing was I could just see people standing in the background sweaty. I'm like, that dude's not a zombie. That's just a sweaty man. That lady just looks like a lady. That's just a lady in the background. They didn't even do The Walking Dead where it was like, you know, crazy makeup, kind of okay makeup. Here's a zombie mask. They didn't even do the zombie mask. I'm like, that person doesn't look like a zombie. That looks like a person just in the background, just like, huh. And I'm like, that's just a sweaty person. And I'm like, they couldn't just, you know, put more makeup in or something. It seemed like they had a giant budget considering all the CG stuff they did for, you know, landscapes and monsters and all that, and shooting in like multiple wildly different locations. So I don't know. It's just crazy because I'm like, this is weird. All in all, the whole thing was weird. But the zombie stuff, I was just like, I can't even enjoy the zombies in the show. Once again, not just the running thing, even though, yeah, that does bother me like a tiny bit. They don't even do slow zombies. They don't even, I mean, heck, I guess they would have to build up to it, but they kind of reference that zombies are just always like that from the very beginning. They don't really show any of the human stuff except for like the incident, and all those seem like fast moving zombies too. So it was never like a reference where they say like, you know, they used to be slow or something. Like, once again, a new concept you can throw in if you make it more scientific. And it's like, as the zombies stay zombies longer, the virus readjusts their bodies or whatever. They're not even dead in this. They're not even zombie. I don't know. You know what? I just thought of that and that really pissed me off. They're not even actually dead. I'm gonna probably talk about this at some other point. I'm gonna get to my PlayStation 5 and just enjoy stuff. Resident Evil 8 Gold Edition is coming out. That's going to be great. I'm excited for the DLC. Obviously, I have the game, but I'm excited for the DLC. We get to play as Rose. We get a third-person mode. That's pretty neat. More mercenaries. At least there's something to look forward to. Because, man, these shows. It's crazy. I would love to know your thoughts on the Resident Evil show. If you have a favorite part, I would like to know. Like I said, I do technically have a couple moments where I was like, that's really cool. And then there's like Evelyn dancing, and you know, that was an interesting moment too. But we'll love to know your thoughts on the show. Favorite parts, least favorite parts. They should have just stuck with the past. I genuinely believe like that, you know, like I said, even if it led up to an apocalypse, that mystery of like, how do they keep going to the next moment and how does this work? I think I would have enjoyed that way more than the way they ended it, where it's like, okay, Billy's actually controlling it. You know, controlling Umbrella, and she's keeping Evelyn alive and stuff, and it's just not as entertaining. I don't really care about seeing the end of it. Like, it honestly doesn't matter as much. So I'm like, what happened in the past? What happened when they met Ada Wong? You know, the world may never know because I just don't see a season 2, but I could be wrong. Either way, we'll love to know your thoughts on this show. Good, bad, all the bad, all the good. If there's more than like 2 things, but please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.